Hello and welcome back to Cooking the Books with me, Gilly Smith, the podcast which takes us through 4 food moments from the books of our favourite food writers. It's about all of life through the prism of food. And this week I'm exploring the secrets of Britain's Desi Kitchens with Britain's best home cook finalist, Sarah Woods.
You know, in the past, immigration has been framed in a negative narrative. And I think it's taking back that story and saying, hold on a minute, let's celebrate what we're contributing. And that's the essence of Desi Kitchen.
Her book, Desi Kitchen, is part of the current crop of second-generation Indian cookbooks, which are hitting the shelves right now. But Sarah tells the story of the communities from the Indian subcontinent in which Desi people have enriched so much of Britain with their food and spiritual culture. I asked Sarah why she was so keen to introduce this word Desi into the British vernacular.
It was actually to tell a story, because I think that, for starters, many people may not know what Desi means. So I myself, I was born and raised in the West Midlands, but my parents came from the north of India, in the Punjab. So my identity is quite blended in a sense. It borrows from a number of different cultures. That's what, is involved in being Desi. And I guess that identity is then transferred onto our food tastes. It's very diverse and nuanced because, there is no such thing as Indian food. There is no such thing as an Indian person in many ways because, it's all about, your identity is so wrapped up in regionality. It's hugely nuanced. It's telling that complete story and the various communities that make up the Indian subcontinent.
Yeah. As I just said to you, apologies for my bleary brain this morning because I'm still recovering from Gerd Loyal's book launch last night, and out this week on Cooking the Books as we're talking is Gerd's episode about second generation Indian cooking. It's about this explosion of flavours, the flavour chords as he calls them, which is unpacking all these different influences and making it your own. But what I get from your book that's quite different, Sarah, is that it is a celebration of all of those different Desi communities all around the country. And I love the essays. I love the recipes, my God. And they do come from all the different communities, the Kashmiri, the Nepalese, the Sri Lankan, the Bangladeshi, the Pakistani. There are people from those different countries living in Britain cooking amazing food, and you've spoken to a lot of them. Let's just start there. Tell us about the different areas. So you grew up in the Black Country in the West Midlands. So first of all, take us to your story.
I guess for me, in order to understand a food culture, you need to understand its people. There's a big Punjabi community in the West Midlands and the Black Country. So that was my starting point. So I told the story, and I think food, it's about intertwining culture, identity, history. These are all wrapped up together. So it starts with the arrival of my grandfather, who came to the UK in the 1960s. After the Second World War, the country needed to be rebuilt, and it relied heavily on immigrant labour. There was an invitation to citizens of the Commonwealth to come to Britain to help in this rebuilding of the country. So he answered that call, as many people did. Then when he was settled, he called over my father and my grandma. And my dad was 12 years old when he came to the country. So, I grew up around, just such amazing traditions. One of the key features of Punjabi cooking is tandoori cooking. So Grandad even built a tandoor in the back garden. And they were fantastic gardeners. They'd grow their own fruit and veg. And I guess because ingredients weren't as readily as available as they are now, they grow all kinds of vegetables. We loved our greens, so spinach, fenugreek leaves, which is called methi. There are these radish pods, they're called mungre, which are absolutely delicious, sharp and peppery. So they had some of these ingredients that you probably wouldn't find in your local supermarket. I just grew around this culture. They cooked from scratch all of the time. They always ate seasonal produce. I come from a large family, so dinner times were a busy period. And we always had lots of visitors. And because my grandmother and my mother were exceptional cooks, we couldn't get rid of these people. So it was chaotic bliss that I remember growing up around in. But it was just wonderful.
But also, you were talking about the workforce being brought over, but it was brought over from all over the Commonwealth as well. And so you were rubbing shoulders with, British Caribbeans as well. And you write about the influence of that in the food. The smells must have been absolutely amazing in the Black Country, and particularly in Handsworth, which we sort of know most for. Balti.
Well, an actual balti, to give its proper pronunciation, means like a big. It's a bucket. So it's food that was cooked kind of in vats and huge quantities, really. But yes, it's a thing, and you've got it's typified Punjabi. It's predominantly Punjabi flavours in the Midlands, and it's typified by these big, bold, gutsy flavours, and lots of dairy. So it's all the good stuff. So the cream, the butter. You chuck that all in. It's very robust.
Yeah. Take us briefly as we spin around the country to Sabrina in Glasgow, for example. You talk about Glasgow as an amazing place for Pakistani settlers. They went to the Gorbals as peddlers, first of all, selling door to door. And that kind of entrepreneurial culture is celebrated very, very much in Glasgow. That you can go to the museums, but also the festivals there celebrated as well. It's very embedded, isn't it? Tell us a little bit about your story about Sabrina, who represents Glasgow.
Yeah, I guess I wanted authentic voices to represent each of these communities, to really bring them to life. I can write, confidently about the Punjabi community because that's my heritage. But for the Pakistani community, and there's a big Pakistani community in Glasgow, as you rightly point out, I wanted an authentic voice to really, just give it that life. And Sabrina's story was very, very lovely. So originally there were many immigrants. It's a big immigrant area, the Gorbals in Glasgow, and her grandfather. So a lot of the movement for people was as a result of independence and the partition of India. So there was lots of the Punjab was a state that was split. So her grandfather came from the Pakistani side of the Punjab. And he actually didn't mean to stay. He came en route to Canada, and he came with just only £5 in his pocket. And as you say, he worked as a peddler selling door to door because, he'd sell stockings and various wares. Once he was settled, he called for his wife. And his wife then joined, turned into a family business. She would manufacture and make these garments that he would then go and sell door to door. Obviously he was very entrepreneurial, very successful. He spotted the gap in the market and he made hay. And ultimately, they went on to set up their own manufacturing business, their clothes manufacturing business. They wanted to employ hundreds of people. He became hugely successful, a millionaire, no less. And I guess once he was settled in Glasgow, he just couldn't leave the place because he fell in love with it. And there's so much exciting fusion and blending of different cultures in Glasgow and in Scotland generally, because you've just got that, you can blend from that gorgeous natural larder. So that's one of my favourite recipes, very, very, fab recipes in there. And also a chicken tikka, a spaghetti a la chicken tikka masala, because chicken tikka masala was its birthplace was Glasgow, by all accounts, yeah.
Indeed. And then Gerd actually tells that wonderful story about this sort of circular made in Britain, taken back as a sort of a pastiche of Indianness to India, and then bring it back to Britain as this kind of reinvented Indian thing. So you said that you didn't know very much about South Indian food when you were starting to research the book, and there were lots of new things that you bump into. You talk about the Zoroastrian community in London. You didn't know very much about it. I mean, a lot of us wouldn't know very much about it, but you bring these to life through the stories of the people in essays, and that's really important, isn't it? It's sort of, I interviewed Claudia Roden recently, and she talked about when she was writing the book of Jewish food, she was going into kitchens to find the secret recipes, these secret lives of people who we live next to. And this is what you do. The book is very rich in story. I love Anil, for example, a data scientist, lives in Bradford. He's a football coach. gives free lessons to young kids who want to play football in one of the most deprived local authorities. And you give those statistics. 15% of the district households are in fuel poverty. 22% of children living below the poverty line. Somebody like Anil comes in and offers free training to young kids in football. What a huge difference somebody like that will make to the community.
Well, it's not only a celebration of food, because I think you really need to get, I guess in many ways, the book is written to feed your mind, body and soul. You know, there are recipes to nourish you, and it will feed your mind in terms of an education piece, because it talks about, you know, the context for the movement of people, the history, and there's also spirituality to feed your soul, because it will tell you about, you know, the religions of some of these communities, and you know, the particular anecdote that you've pinpointed, Anil. He's of the Muslim faith, and one of the pillars of Islam is charity. So I wanted to celebrate and give a platform to the wonderful work that's being done in the community. You know, the real positive things, and there's so much being done for charity within you know, the Muslim community and the Muslim faith. Equally, you mentioned Zoroastrianism and Parsis. I knew next to nothing about Zoroastrianism. And it's very philanthropic. It's based on 3 values, which are good thoughts, good deeds, and good words. And there's a lovely story that's connected with that chapter, and it's Parsi folklore. Now, the Parsis were a persecuted faith that came from Persia, and they sought asylum in the Gujarat initially. Now, their priest came to King Rana Javad and, you know, sought solace. And there was a communication barrier. So, you know, King Rana's council sent a glass full of milk, brimming to the top, to convey that our country we're full. We can't accommodate you. You know, we can't give you the asylum that you seek. So the very clever Parsi priests, they added sugar to this milk to sweeten it, to send back the message that we will improve your land, we will add value with our good thoughts, with our good deeds, and, you know, we will enrich the land that we settle in. So impressed, they were granted asylum, and that's precisely what they went on to do. And I think in a wider context, the book is a celebration of how these Desi communities are adding sugar to the milk in the UK.
Lovely. Yeah, absolutely. I did a book about Australian food back in 1998, looking at all the ways of immigration and how much better the food was. I mean, the food was pretty awful before the 1950s, when the Italians first came over, and then in the 60s the Greeks came over, and then in the 70s the Vietnamese boat people came over, and now look at Australian food culture. It is just wonderful. The riches are in those stories. I remember also going to a supper club with Sri Lankan women who had, as very often happens, because they don't have the money to come into town, they stay within their community and they don't learn language, and they're very isolated. And there was this fantastic supper club charity that brought them out, got them to show off their food and explain their food in very broken English to people like me who really couldn't get enough of it. The food was incredible. They were so proud, so amazed to find people just loving their food, that it was an entry level for them to be able to really slowly learn the language. So food is a way of getting these communities out into the wider world and being seen and appreciated.
I completely agree. I mean, even, you know, I'm talking about the diversity of these different communities, but the unifying factor is that food is our love language, food and feeding. And we're all united by this. And I guess with immigrant food, it kind of, you know, it breaks down any geographical barriers in many ways, doesn't it? Yeah. And, you know, I think there's a real zeitgeist, and quite rightly, about this story, because I guess, you know, in the past, you know, immigration has been framed in a negative narrative. And I think it's taking back that story and saying, hold on a minute, let's celebrate what we're contributing. And that's the essence of Desi Kitchen.
It is, and absolutely rightly so. When you were on Britain's Best Home Cook, of which you were the finalist, one of the finalists, were you able to talk about this with Mary Berry and Angela Hartnett and Chris Gavin? I mean, were you able to have those conversations on telly, which tends to dumb things down?
No, I wasn't able to have those conversations, really, which is a shame. And, I guess that's a reason for writing the book, is to get these stories and this celebration really out into a wider audience. But I was making some fusion-type recipes, which I'm not quite sure what Mary made of it, because I think, and I guess that's why I wanted to tell both sides of the story, to please everybody and to please people like Mary, who does really like the classic cooking, and it's a classic for a reason. And she's a very wonderful, wonderful lady, is Mary. She's a winker. I got several Mary Berry winks, and thankfully she liked my cooking. She doesn't like it too spicy, though, and that's another part of Indian cookery, which is, it's not just about adding chili heat, it's about balancing the flavours and the spices and layering everything up. In the book, it offers both classic recipes, but also, the reinventions, how the cultures have been blended, because I think that in itself tells a story too.
On which, let's go into your first food moment, Green Goddess Saag. This is about nostalgia.
Yes.
You say that Mary Berry likes it classic. Well, actually, it's authentic in this telling, isn't it? Tell us about this. My food memory is saag. It's called sarson ka saag, and to give it its proper name, and it is transportative because, as I mentioned, my grandparents grew their own vegetables, and we had loads of spinach. So one of the main ingredients in saag is spinach, and then also fenugreek leaves, coriander, lots of garlic, chilies, and it's just utterly delicious, and it's thickened with cornmeal. And I just have visions of my grandma just kind of bent over, picking all of the greens, all of the spinach. It was a real labour of love back then. And then the sink would be awash with greens because we'd have to clean wave after wave. It was very much a shared all hands on deck process. And then, it would be, the greens would all be boiled. And then there was this ferocious looking contraption. It's almost like a foot scythe. It's called a dart. And it's a wooden block with this menacing looking curled blade that my gran would kind of really dexterously, chop. And then you boil them up and then you have to bash them. And she had this really large wooden pestle that we'd bash them with. And again, it was a real labour of love. Nowadays, just to let your listeners know, it's a much easier process. You just use a stick blender. But yeah, and it just transports me back. And because it was a labour of love, it's, to me, nothing tells you that I love you more than saag. And my mum still makes it by the vat load. And it's her expression of love. But it's interesting, whenever I talk to people about food memories, they remember the process. I mean, they do remember the taste and they remember the smell, but it's generally the smells of the cooking wafting through the house, or the turning of the mincer, or the pounding of, or the collecting of the vegetables from the garden, or something like that. It's really interesting. It's a sort of a muscle memory as well, nostalgia, isn't it?
I think so.
Rather than just something being given to you on a plate. And remembering that it's the making of the cake and the licking of the bowl and its process. It's really interesting. Your second food moment takes us to Kashmir, which I very much like to go to right now. The Tabak Maz lamb ribs. This again is an example of you finding something new from the wider diaspora. Take us to Kashmir for a moment.
Well, this I would describe as the meat lovers chapter, because Kashmiris love meat. It's very much a nose to tail kind of eating society. No part of the animal is wasted, quite rightly. These tabat mars, it's a lamb rib, and they're cooked twice. So first they're boiled in a fragrant broth with lots of spices and a combination of water and milk until they're absolutely tender. Now, the thing that I would say about these ribs is you've got to have the right cut of rib. So nothing too bony, nothing too fatty, but my butcher calls it a riblet, so it's nice and meaty. So the first process is that you kind of you're boiling them until they're tender, and then the second phase, traditionally you would fry them off in ghee. However, that's a bit too rich for my liking. So what I do is I roast them to render the fat a little more, so they go all lovely and gnarly. And I use a honey and vinegar glaze, and then a spice blend called there's a spice blend in Kashmiri food called basar masala, which I have to say I've become slightly addicted to and obsessed about, because it's just gorgeous. I mean, you can add, garlic granules and onion granules to it and salt, and make it, an all-purpose seasoning, almost like a Desi Cajun spice. It's delicious. So then these ribs are roasted with this honey glaze and then this spice blend. And oh God, it's just one of those moments. It was squarely a foodgasm moment. And you've got the various condiments. I like to have it with dill, because I think it complements the flavours so well. Feta, mint, sliced red onion. It's just divine.
Yeah, because these are sort of, the thing about Kashmir is it has very, very different flavours, doesn't it? It's not spicy and hot chili. It's much more fragrant. I mean, it's very cold in areas of Kashmir as well. And
it can get very cold, yeah.
The way that you're describing those flavours, it feels quite Afghan to me.
Absolutely.
It is very, very different. Taking us from there right down to South India, which, as you said before, you didn't really know very much about. The kottu roti. Tell us about where you got it from and a little bit about the story behind it.
This recipe, it was really lovely, getting under the skin of the culture again, speaking to Manga, who was the voice of this chapter. And it was actually heartbreaking and understanding, I guess, why there's such a big Sri Lankan community in London. And obviously it was escaping a war-torn country. And, sorry to veer off, but it's I guess, it's understanding the risks that generation took in order to save their families, and having a human element to this community. I guess we take different risks, and I talk about this in the anecdote, is that the risk that Manga took. She was very dutiful as a daughter, because in these Desi communities, it's a doctor, lawyer, or accountant that are acceptable careers to follow. And she took the risk of setting up her own clothes business. So there's a lovely story wrapped up in that. And the reason that I loved all of the recipes in the Sri Lankan chapter, but I particularly like kottu roti because it's a dish for leftovers. So it's something that you can easily whip up during the week. So yes, you've got your spices, you've got your coconut oil, but then you've got your spices like fresh curry leaves, black mustard seeds, the coconut, and you can use fresh coconut in this too. But I love the fact that it's bringing in a leftover curry, and you can use whichever curry you like, whether it's chicken, seafood, whatever it may be, as long as it's got lots of sauce. And it's literally just frying everything on in a wok with lots of vegetables, lots of chopped up parathas or chapatis. And it just, the flavours just dance on your tongue. And I love it because it's accessible in the sense that you can whip it up midweek and just have something that's transportative and amazing that, transports you off to Sri Lanka. But you will have done the hard work over the weekend, because I guess there's different occasions for different styles of cooking. Sometimes you want something quick and easy. And I think every good cook needs, a recipe for leftovers, because it's an essential part of managing your fridge, managing your ingredients and home economics, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And what does Manga think about her world coming into your book as part of a greater story of the Desi community in Britain?
She absolutely loves it, and it's been it's always a bit scary and a bit nervous. It's like, okay, I've written this story, I've shared her story. Is she going to like it? And to my relief, all of the contributors have loved their story, because I guess it's because of what Desi Kitchen is saying. Yeah. It's not only spotlighting and highlighting the diversity and saying, look, there is no such thing as Indian food. It's hugely diverse. Just look at how diverse it is. But then also a celebrating of the contribution that's being made, but also providing the context of the history. It's providing that complete story.
Yeah, I do hope that it's going to become a television series. Have you already been talking about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's conversations being had, and yeah, it does transfer well to a docu-series, because there's so much there. It's not as I say, it's not just it's more than just a cookbook.
Watch this space. Your final food moment is apple and jaggery crumble. Of course, it had to be a layered British classic. Tell us about this one.
Puddings are my favourite. All of our family love puddings. And I do confess, I do not like Indian sweets. I eschew mithai. Give me the crumble, give me the trifle, give me the cake, give me the custard, anything with custard. So, it's something we've always, as a family, really loved. But this is particularly special because, again, it connects to my grandma. So, unfortunately, later in life, she got ill. She got poorly, and she had cancer. And as part of the treatment, you lose your taste buds, and it's almost devastating. When you're an exceptional cook. Food is your life, and to lose your taste buds. And she'd started getting her taste buds back, after one particular, cycle of treatment. And I went over and I made her a crumble. She'd just starting tasting the flavours again. And just the look and the delight on her face. She said to me, oh, you've made a Desi crumble. It's not just any old crumble. I'd put clove and cinnamon and all kinds of stuff in it. I didn't put clove and cinnamon in the actual book because I wanted to celebrate jaggery, which is an unrefined sugar cane, as you'll know. Just because of the, I love the fudgy, toffee-like flavours of it, and I just wanted to celebrate that in its entirety. But it's just the look and the happiness that it gave her, kind of, it reflected back onto me, it gave her so much joy, and then seeing the joy on her face gave me joy in return. And that's why it stuck with me, and that's why it's an important recipe. I mean, we grew our own apples. We had all kinds of fruit trees at home, so crumbles were often on for pudding. But this particular one has an apple crumble has a special place in my heart for that very reason. I just see her face, the joy on her face.
What would you say about the book?
I think she'd be hugely proud. My parents are very proud. And it's a shame that she couldn't see it, because she's been such, a big part of it, really. And I dedicated the book to her. They were the original Desis. They were the ones that came, the first generation that came to the UK. They took that risk. And I just have so much admiration for that generation. I guess when you're growing up, you don't always appreciate it. As a child, you're just like, oh, grandma wants me to wash up, or grandma wants me to do something in the garden, or, gosh, why am I having to do this when I'd rather be playing with my siblings? But, the bravery involved in uprooting your family, starting a new life in a country where you're not necessarily fluent in the language, it's completely alien to your way of life, and thriving the way they did, that whole generation, I just have the most amount of respect for them. Because, as I say, the risks they took were the risks of survival. They couldn't afford to fail, and they didn't. It's thanks to them that I have the blessings that I have now. And I guess I'm taking a different risk. My risks are to follow my dreams and to follow my passion, and not necessarily be a doctor or a lawyer.
Thanks for listening. Do follow me on Instagram. I'm @FoodGillySmith, and you can also find a little surprise every week on Substack as I ask my guests for a little extra bite. Just search for Gilly Smith on Substack, and I'll see you next week.